This is Talking Rackheads. Hi, I'm Nigel from The Art of Sound, and this is Season 2 of Talking Rackheads. Yay, we've finally made it to Season 2. It's been quite a summer. Some of you know I've had quite a lot of fun and games here with dealing with 2 hurricanes coming through. Had a very unfortunate accident with my beloved Mustang, which was written off. Had that Mustang for a number of years, loved the vehicle, but for some reason, whenever it was stationary, people wouldn't see it and hit it. Yeah, bright red Mustang, and people always said, "Oh, I never saw you." And so it's true. I had 3 accidents over the period of time I owned that car, and in every single case my car was absolutely stationary when people decided to drive into it. Anyway, it's now gone. It's part of history. So, another part of life up here in the mountains. But it's good to be back. And lots to get on with in this season. For this first episode, let me just play you something. I'll just turn up the volume a little bit here for you. So that is the patch that today we're going to build from scratch. As I promised at the end of last season, I would do an entire patch from scratch for you guys. And this is what I came up with. So we'll get on with that in a moment. But just to give you an idea of what to expect in this season 2, there will be hopefully a few new modules to explore, various mega patches and small patches. I'm also going to focus this season on building small, simple elements to patches that you guys can then use in your own patches. There are a lot of people out there, Synth, Ohmer, who make these wonderful tutorial videos, and they're excellent, and some of them use very complicated techniques and get amazing sounds out of VCV rack. But I want to focus on using simple techniques combined together. So it's sort of like the sum of the parts is greater than the individual parts themselves. And this, I hope, will help people, especially those who are beginning in the world of modular and VCV rack, to get a grip of some of the basics. But also, some of the more experienced people may have missed out on certain simple ideas and techniques that I've learned over the years. So those I'm going to try and emphasize over the next season. Also, of course, Greg will be back with his 10-minute module series. And I expect that first one of those to be in the next episode. Greg took a vacation over the summer and was sorely missed, and I'm really looking forward to his next batch of 10-minute module series. That should be great. And also, I'm hoping that there's going to be a few other people dropping by with patches and techniques and ideas for you guys to take a look at. And finally, there is bound to be a few surprises here and there, which I'm going to keep up my sleeves for now. But I think you'll be find some of them quite interesting indeed. So we'll see how it goes. But anyway, we're back. This is season 2, and here is the first part of this video. To begin this first episode of season 2, what I'm going to do today is what I promised I would do at the end of season 1, and that is build a patch from scratch. A complete patch, something that starts off from nothing and ends up with a piece of music that achieves something, a target that I'm aiming for. And today's target piece is something that's musical, melodic, but evolves, something that plays differently each time, but sort of has the same basic elements of it when it plays back. So each time you play the piece back, it will be different, but familiar and similar in some ways. So that's what I'm going to do. The second part of this is that I'm going to do it not by recording 6 hours of video and boring you to death with all the tedious stuff, but what I'm going to do is do this in a series of snapshots. So I'm going to work on a patch, and when I reach a certain point, stop and then video a segment, and then stop videoing, carry on working, stop when I reach a next step, and then film another segment explaining what I've done, why I've done it, why I've used certain things, what techniques I've used, what's the reasoning behind them. And the idea of this entire segment is to help you understand how someone like me creates a patch and therefore some music using VCV Rack. Now, there are lots of people out there doing tutorials, you know, people like Ohmer and Synth, and they're really, really good tutorials, and I learn a lot from them myself. But what I want to do in this particular segment, and also probably for the rest of the series, is try to do things simply. Keep things down to very basic techniques and basic patches, stuff that most you may know or know bits of, but hopefully there'll be some tricks and tips that I'm going to show that you may not have thought about. But at the same time, I want to keep the patches themselves relatively simple so they're easy to understand. It's like putting together little basic building blocks to build something bigger. The old adage being the sum of the parts is greater than the individual parts themselves. And that's what I want to achieve. So here we have my basic starting patch. And what I've got here is I've got my audio interface. I'm using Peak by CF to sort of give a sort of limiter effect on the overall output. I've got the delay plus from AS, the plateau from Valet. I love the plateau's reverb, and I'm going to use it as a sort of general wash over the mix. And then I've got the console mixer from VCV. Now I know a lot of you use, for example, the free version of CF's mixer modules, for example, and they're really good. But I prefer to use console simply because of all these CV patch points allow me a great deal of flexibility when I'm mixing. But, you know, feel free to use something else if you don't own the console from VCV. My clocks are being provided by the clocked module from Impromptu Modular, my favorite clocked module because it's got so many different sort of ways of using it, with the swing and the pulse width modulation and the delay. These can create all sorts of interesting clocked effects, as well as having, you know, clock dividers and multipliers built in. And I'm actually using 2 of those patched together. Now, As for the first part of the pitch generating bit for this patch, I'm using the Turing machine from Stellar. Now, this is one of my favorite random music or random pitch and rhythm generating modules. And if you've watched any of my previous episodes, you know I use this a lot. But what I want to do today is explain to you why I'm using it and why people who first use it listen to it and go, ugh, yeah, I can't use that. It doesn't produce anything interesting. I'll show you some of the techniques I use on how to tame it a little so it produces more musical outputs. I'm using the Even VCO from Vessek as my basic oscillator. Love this oscillator. It's got so many little tiny simple things in it, like the octave switch, for example, which makes it so much easier to change the range in which it sounds. And it's got 5 different types of oscillator outputs, which is good, different waveforms. I'm using the Laterus diode ladder filter from Vult as my basic filter. This is a sort of standard ladder filter, but again, one of the great filters in VCV Rack. And as with all things Vult, the modeling of it is absolutely superb. And, you know, I typically, any of Vult's filters, and for that matter, any of his other plugins, tend to be my go-to ones. And then as an envelope and a VCA, I'm using Slap by Vult, simply because it is an ADSR and a VCA all combined into one module. Just simple to use, but again, very effective and very easy. And what I've done here is just created a very basic synth voice, and I'm taking the output from the Turing machine into the volt per octave input of the VCO, then the audio output from the Even VCO to the input of the filter, the 24 dB output from the filter to the in of the VCA on Slap, out from the VCA on the Slap to the input of my mixer. I've got no reverb, I've got no delay, and I've set the pan to 0. And the only other thing I'm using here is I'm using the gate, which I'm being generated by a clock. The same clock was also driving the Turing machine. So what we're going to get is that very familiar basic output of the Turing machine, which sounds something like this. Not very exciting, I know. But that's what the Turing machine generates by itself when you don't try and tame it. That's just its raw output. Now, the first part of taming the Turing machine is using the scale knob. The scale knob is this little knob here, and this is in fact an attenuator, and it determines the range of notes that are output from the output of the Turing machine to the 1 volt per octave input of the Even VCO. The more open the attenuator is, the wider the range. The more closed it is, the smaller the range. And what I mean by that is something like this. So that's fully open, and now it pitches from across the entire range of possible pitches being generated in VCV Rack. As I turn it to the left, that range gets lesser and less. And if I get to about the 9 o'clock position, then the range of pitches is about over 1 octave. So that sort of narrows it down, so you don't just get pitches all over the place, you're just getting them within a select specific range. And once I've done that, I can use the octave control on the even VCO to choose the octave I want it to play in. But again, I mean, you know, it's okay, but it's nothing stunning. It's certainly not going to set the world on fire. And it's just a series of random pitches, some in tune, some out of tune, basically just all over the place. And it has its uses, but we need to make this a little bit more musical and more interesting for it to be a part of this patch. So let's look at the next stage. I'm going to spend a few minutes adding a few things onto this patch, and then I'll produce the next bit of the video. So, 2 or 3 minutes has passed, and what I've done now is I've added a new module to the patch, and I've tweaked a couple of things in the basic settings for the sound. So what have I added and why? Well, as I said in the first part, the Turing machine generates random pitches, and these pitches are all over the place. Some are in tune, some are out of tune. They're wide ranges from very high to very low, and the truth is that that's useful but not particularly musical. So to make the pitches more musical, I'm using something called a quantizer. Now, what is a quantizer? Well, the basic way a quantizer works is it takes pitches or voltages coming out from a module, in this case the Turing machine, going to the input of this particular quantizer, and what it does is it takes those pitches and maps them to either a known scale or a known set of notes. So basically it takes an input and matches it to the nearest pitch or scale that's selected in the quantizer. There are 2 types, generally speaking, of quantizer: scale quantizers and note quantizers. Now, what a scale quantizer does is that you choose a scale like a major scale, a minor scale, Ionian, you name it, any type of scale from a list of scales provided. And what that does is assign or map the incoming pitches to the nearest pitch found in that scale. And scale quantizers are very useful if you want to work in a particular type of scale, like you want to work in a minor scale. Then whatever is received is mapped to the nearest note of that particular scale, and then output from the quantizer to your VCO. A note quantizer, however, doesn't use scales. It allows you to select specific notes. So you can create your own scales or certain melodic patterns within the note quantizer, so that whatever's output from here only matches to which notes you've selected in whatever scale or whatever you want. So in this case, I'm using a note quantizer called the CustomScaler from Noobhour. Now, I've got to say, this is one of these new modules that's come out over the summer while I was on vacation. And I absolutely love this quantizer. It's got so many interesting bits of functionality, some of which I'm going to be covering later on. But as a basic note quantizer, it really is very, very good indeed. What the CustomScaler is 5 octaves of notes. So here's the first octave. This is the root of that octave. So say, for example, my pitch here is tuned to the scale of C. Then this root note here is C, 2 octaves below the center. This one is 1 octave below. This is the normal octave. This is 1 octave above, and this is 2 octaves above. And each of these dots above is a note in the scale. So if this was C, this would be C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, and so on. And so each of these rows is one chromatic scale from the bass pitch down here. Now, at the moment, I've got the bass pitch set to C. This little knob here changes that bass pitch, so you can tune it to any bass pitch you want. So if you want to do something in G, you would turn this knob so that the bass note here is in G, and then all the scales would be in G major or G minor or whatever else up and down. However, I'm just leaving it in C at the moment. The other thing I've done here is increase the scale to the full range of notes here. So the Turing machine is generating high notes, low notes, way up high, way down low. But the Quantizer will take those notes and still map them to the nearest possible note that I've selected here. Interestingly enough, the CustomScaler has its own attenuator in it. It's a very simple one. It attenuates the range of notes to 5 octaves or 3 octaves or just a single octave. So think of it as 5 octaves is any of the notes selected in the whole of the grid. 3 is just the 3 middle columns, and 1 would just be notes in the middle column here, which would limit the range of notes being generated from its output going into the even VCO. So I've selected 5 octaves of Cs. So when I play this patch, all you'll hear is 5 different Cs being played from the Turing machine coming out into the CustomScaler, and from the CustomScaler going into the even VCO. I've also changed a little bit of the sound, tuned it a little bit so it's a bit more interesting sound. And this is what it sounds like. So there you can hear 5 different Cs played at random from the Turing machine, and each one's being mapped by the CustomScaler Quantizer and then output to the even VCO. Now, if I click on any of these buttons in the grid, those notes will also be available to be quantized to. So, for example, this row here is fifths, or Gs in this case. So if I select this one and this one and this one, now I'll get Cs and Gs in this range as possible outputs. And if I select Fs, now I've got Cs, Fs and Gs as possibles. Turn these off and put in E's. So that just makes it a little bit more musical. I'm choosing specific notes it can quantize to, and those notes that I choose manipulate the output from the Turing machine and turn it into a much more musical sounding series of notes. Again, not stunningly interesting, but at least it becomes a little bit more musical. Okay, so now I'm going to do a bit more work, and then I'll come back with the next incremental part of the patch. A few minutes later, and a couple more tweaks. So what I've done now is I've created this series of notes in CustomScaler that I want the pitches to be quantized to. So I've created a little pattern in here, and then I've tweaked the ladder filter and a little bit of the envelope, and I've also added a little bit of reverb to the patch and some delay. And the delay is to give a more sort of like moving, flowing sequencer part. So now it sounds like this. Without the delay, it sounds like this. And I've set up what's called a triplet delay over here. So these figures are based on this BPM. And when you use these figures, you get what's called a triplet delay. So it sort of becomes like a ping pong delay going left to right, as well as the original. Again, a bit more musical, and there's definitely little melodies going on. Of course, they're constantly changing all the time because the Turing machine is in generation mode, so it just keeps generating new patterns all the time. So every time it goes around 16 steps, it generates another new pattern. So it's constantly changing the melody, if you like. Okay, so now let's try and change the voice a little bit. What I've done here now is I've added a second even VCO. So I've now got two VCOs, and both of them are playing the same note coming out from the Vult per octave output of the CustomScaler. And then what I've done is taken their outputs and fed them into the knobs mixer by Vult. Very simple little mixing module that allows me to mix together, and I use this a lot for multiple voices, little internal mixes before they reach the main mixer up here. And I've switched it to the mix mode down here, so you can see it says mix now, and then the output from the mixed two VCOs goes into the filter, out from the filter, into the slap VCA, out of the slap VCA, back to the mixer. And this is now an overall volume control for these two voices. And these two knobs here, these allow me to volume balance between the two modules. So I can turn the values up and down here for individual volumes for each of the VCOs, and this is an overall volume before it reaches the mixer. So I've chosen to separate the two voices by an octave. So this is playing one octave, and this is playing an octave higher to give a little more texture. I've also changed the envelope, and I've reduced the filter. And now what I'm going to do is tweak these things whilst I'm recording so you can hear the differences certain things make. So here's the pattern playing as it stands now. open the filter a little bit. Gives a bit more texture. If I drop it down and add a bit more resonance. Notice with the cutoff down and the resonance up, you get a bit more of that peaky sort of sound to the sequence. Now, I'm using the output from the slap, so I'm going to use the envelope here, this little attenuator here, to increase the cutoff to match the envelope. So the filter opens and closes fairly quickly, synchronized with this envelope here. Now the last thing I want to do, and one of the reasons why I added a second VCO apart from the octave, is that I want to make the sound fatter. And to make it fatter, what you do is you take the tune buttons here, these little knobs, and on a Mac you hold down the command key to make a small amount of difference. And I'm going to detune each of the voices. This one a little below the pitch, and this one a little above the pitch. So overall they're still the same pitch, and it's very important that when you change tuning like this with small amounts, that you do an equal amount on both sides. So a little below and a little above still gives you the basic tuning that originally started. If you do just below, then the tuning goes flat. If you do just above, then the tuning goes sharp. If you do a little each way, then it stays basically centered. So let's just add a little bit here. And you hear that sort of phasing type effect, and that fattens the sound up. If I open the filter a bit more, and I'll center both knobs, you'll hear the sound merge together again. So that's without any detune. Now I'll detune them. And just that little difference changes the tone. If I drop the even VCO on this side back to the same octave as this one, you'll hear it even more pronounced. That's the same note, the same tuning. Now I'll detune. And the more I add, the more out of tune, the more phasing I get. Increase this back to an octave higher. And detune again. You don't need much, just a little bit, either way. Just to fatten that sound up a bit. And I'm going to turn the upper volume of the higher part down a little bit by rotating this knob here. So now we're hearing this voice slightly louder than this one, which allows a little bit of the upper part to come through, but still fundamentally it's a bassish note from here. Now I'm going to close the filter down a bit. to make the sound a little darker. Also, you'll notice I've increased the ratio of the clocks now to 2 times, so the sequence plays twice the speed. It just sounds a bit better, especially when using it with echoes. Okay, so let's do a bit more work and get to the next part. So, now we've moved on a little bit and I've added a few extra little things to this. The first thing you'll notice is I've added yet another VCO. So I've got 2 VCOs playing at the same octave but slightly detuned, and I've got a third VCO now playing an octave higher at straight tuning, and I've added that through the knobs and again mixed them so the 2 lower octaves are slightly less of a volume than the upper octave in this case, and then going into the filter, to the envelope and out to the mixer. So it sounds like this. Still a very random sort of set of notes, although they're musical, but I made the sequencer part a little fatter, a little richer by adding that extra VCO. So now you'll notice also that I've added a couple of switches, and for these I use the Mark 1 and Mark 2 triggers by AS. They're 2 different types of switches, and they allow me in this case to manually mix or automate certain things. Now later on I'm going to show you how to fully automate this, but for now, so I can demonstrate it, I'm going to manually change certain things. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the Triggers Mark 1. And what the Triggers Mark 1 does is allows you to send a specific voltage. In this case, I'm going to send 10 volts. Whenever I press this button, this will send a constant signal of 10 volts from its output. If I press this button, it will send a quick momentary amount of 10 volts. And for this purpose, I'm going to be using the latch. So when I press this button, it sends a constant voltage of 10 volts out of its output to, in this case, the CV input of the Turing machine. And it will carry on sending that until I click the latch button again, and then it will stop sending that voltage to the Turing machine. So what does the CV input do? Well, it affects this knob. Now, what's this knob doing? Well, if I play the sequence as it is, you can hear that it keeps generating new pitches and constantly. It never repeats something. It just keeps playing over and over again. New pitches in a constant stream. But if I rotate this knob to the right, then it plays less new notes. So every so often it will play some of the original notes in the first sequence, but then change some of them for the next time around. And the length of this pattern that it's generating is selected here, and at the moment it's set to 16 steps. So every time it goes round 16 steps, it will change some of them and leave some of them the same. If I put it back to dead center, then it will change all of the 16 steps, or at least it's possible that all of the 16 steps will change. The further to the right, the less likely that is to happen, until you get to full right, and that locks the pattern. So now it's playing 16 steps over and over again without any of the pitches changing. Now, to show you that in working, I'm going to press the latch button now, and you'll hear those steps lock into a loop like this. And you can hear it's now repeating every 16 steps the same selection of notes. If I unlock it, it will go back to random generation. And if I latch it again, it will lock the loop. So that then becomes like a loop recorder, if you like, a quick way of freezing a series of notes into a pattern that you like, or a pattern that just repeats for a period of time and then goes back to random generation. Now, I've set up a couple of bass drums here to give you like a metronome effect, because at the moment it's set for 16 steps. This means the loop will repeat every 16. But I actually prefer to use 12 or 6 steps. And the reason for that is that when it's set to 16, it's basically 2 bars so every 2 bars it repeats. I prefer to throw it a little off balance by setting it to 12, which means that it changes every 6 beats, not every 8 beats. 2 bars, and that makes the pattern evolve more and basically play something different for 4 bars rather than 2, and then loops round again. So to show you what I mean, I'll turn on the bass drums and play it at a 16 step pattern. You can hear that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then it loops. Now if I change this to 12 steps, now it will repeat every 12 steps or 6 beats. If I unlatch it, it'll just generate random pitches, and then when I latch it, it will now loop every 12 beats again. Unlatch it. Latch it. So that's a great simple way of almost like recording your favorite little loops. When you hear something you like, you can latch it and it will play that repeatedly until you unlatch it, and then the song will move on to a different pattern. And this is how I use the Turing machine to generate interesting patterns and then lock them into loops, because that way I can hear things and go, oh, I like that little pattern, quickly lock it, and it will play for 5, 10, 12 bars, and then I unlock it and allow it to generate something new, and then I'll lock it again. And it just lets you control the music a bit more, but still retaining those random or semi-random elements. So that's what I'm using the first triggers for. The second triggers I'm using as an on-off functionality. So this is like a switch. When I press this button, it generates a quick voltage to, in this case, the random input of the CustomScaler. So what does the random input do? Well, in latch mode, and here's latch mode, and with this input and with a tiny bit of probability. So I've turned this round so it's only a little tiny bit. Every time it receives a signal, it will turn off one of the notes selected, or two or three. It's hard to know. It's at random. So if I press the button, watch here, and some of these may turn yellow. Oh, there you go. So this one went yellow, this one went yellow, and this one went yellow, which means for the time being, those notes will not be played. So it won't quantize to those notes. It will only quantize to these ones. And if I press it again, oh, it turned that one off. Now, the ones that are yellow can also come back on again during this process. So what this is really doing is turning off and on some of the preset notes I've selected. So it changes the range of things that it can use in its sequence. So if that original one here, let me turn everything back on again, and I'll play that pattern as it's looping. So you can hear that pattern is repeating every 12 beats. Now if I trigger this, it may turn off one or more of those notes that the pattern's using, which changes the sound of the sequence. See how that changed? If I turn this one back on again, and turn it off again, now if I press this little trigger here again, let's see if it comes up with something different. And if you notice, it's sort of like a subtle change to the sequence. It's only changed one or two notes in the sequence. If I press it again, and again, and again. So that's another way of adding some extra probability and a little bit of motion and change to the pattern. So between these two here, the Turing machine generating its random stuff, but every so often I can lock it into a pattern and then change the scale that's being used, the notes here, to change the pattern subtly, just changing one or two things at a time, gives you a way of evolving that musical pattern. And using both together can generate really interesting patterns based on the original one that started. So it sort of evolves the melody as it's playing through, keeping things different but sort of familiar all the way through the piece. Okay, so let's go on to the next step. 20 minutes later, and here we go. I've added quite a few new things to this. So let me explain to you what I've changed. First things first, I've automated the triggers now. So to automate them, what I've done is sent clock signals from the clocked module over here for example, this one, coming out from here and going to the external input for triggers Mark II. So every 32 clocks, set to minus 32, this will send a trigger turning on and off the triggers Mark II, which in turn generates a slightly random version of the CustomScaler's note quantizing. So every 32 beats, it will actually change the pattern. And I've done the same with the triggers Mark I. Here's the external going into this output from the clock. And this will change, turn it on and off every 16 clocks. So you'll notice that this turns on and off twice as fast as this. So every 16 clocks, this will lock the pattern in, playing a repetitive pattern, and then every 16 clocks it will turn it off. So it plays something at random for 16 clocks, then plays a loop for 16 clocks, and then plays something for random for 16 clocks and looped. In the meantime, again, the quantizer is also modifying, but every 32 clocks. So together you get this evolving, looping pattern that happens that just generates something that moves forward, changes, but only subtly, but at the same time you'll hear repetitive stuff and constantly changing stuff throughout the piece. To add a bit more movement to the sound, I'm using some LFOs as well. And I'm using the LFOs to do two different tasks. I'm using the LFOs now to open and close the cutoff and the resonance of the filter. So I've set two LFOs, triangle LFOs, at slow speeds using the tri-LFO from AS. So I've got two of them here, and they're sending out a triangle wave to here. So this will slowly open and close the cutoff and slowly open and close the resonance, but at slightly different speeds. So the two will constantly change. Again, giving a feel of movement in the sound of the piece. So we've created movement in the notes. Now we're creating movement and change in the sound. And then I'm also using a third LFO, this one down here, to open and close the amount of decay from the envelope. So this will make the notes shorter and longer again over time based on this triangle wave coming from the LFO. So we'll get long notes and short notes. We'll get open and closed filters. We'll get open and closed resonance. And we'll get notes, pitches played at random elements changing slowly over time. Combine all this together and you end up with a melodic part that has got lots of motion, lots of texture changes, but still retains familiarity. It's not such wide changes that it sounds something different all the time. So if I turn that up so you can hear it, then you'll see what I mean. Oh, there is one other change I made as well. Instead of playing notes constantly, pop, 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 I've taken a gate output from the Turing machine and fed that to the gate input of a slap. So now gates themselves change over time. So instead of playing a constant tap, 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 now it's playing along in pattern with these sequences here. So you'll hear different rhythmic patterns happening as well that again will lock as part of the loop but also change over time as the Turing machine does its thing. So there you go. That's just an idea of what the melody is going to sound like over a period of time. And again, it's going to constantly change, but evolve, but still have some familiarity. So you never know quite what it's going to generate. So having done that, then I decided, well, it's about time I added something, an additional voice now, to give it some sort of structure. And what I've done to do that is I've created a bass drone part. Now, the way I've done this is I've used two even VCOs playing using the even outputs, and again gone to a knob here. So there's my knob to mix those two sounds together. And I've also used a Cornrows X in this sort of stringy sound waveform that it has. And I've taken that output and mixed it in as well. And then all three of those sounds go to the input from the filter and then out from the filter straight to the second input on my mixing desk. I'm not using an envelope. So I want these to be sort of like a droney, not a rhythmic patch, but a droney sound. Then the other thing I've done, and this is sort of like one of these techniques that I use, is that I'm using the Phrase-Seek 16 to generate the pitches that are sent to the Vult inputs on all three modules. But what I've done is set the PS16 to play in random mode. So how do you use this to generate a series of notes that are random but melodic? Well, what I've done is I've set up a 16-step sequence, and I've selected specific notes, and if you watch down here, the first 8 notes are all exactly the same, a C. See, all the same notes. So the first 8 notes are all C. Then the 9th note is an F. The 10th note is an F. The 11th note is a G. The 12th note is a G. And there are the F and the G below the first C. Then I've got an A flat, one of them. A B flat, one of them. An E flat, one of them, and then back to a C, but a C an octave below. So the majority of the notes are C. And then there are 2 Fs, 2 Gs, 1 A flat, 1 B flat, 1 E flat, and 1 C an octave lower. And because I've done that, when they play in random mode, more often than not, it's just going to play a C, because 8 of the 16 steps are a C. And then every so often it will play an F or a G, and those, because there are 2 each, they are slightly more likely to play than steps that are only 1 step per note change. So as this randomly goes through itself, and if I run this and you watch here, you'll see how it works. See, playing a C. Oh, now it plays an F. Played an F again. Now it went to a C an octave below. Playing another C but an octave higher. And this semi-random selection is basically what I've done is weighted the probability. That means it's more likely to play C's than it is any other notes. It's more likely to play F's and G's than the 4 single notes, but less likely to play those than the standard C. And then these individual notes are only going to happen rarely because there's only 1 for each of them. So in full random mode, over the entire 16-step sequence, you get a semi-melodic part. And these notes I chose because they'll all work against this sequence that's in C. And I've been very careful in that sequence to make sure that all the notes match. Just try them out and see what happens. So if you listen to this part, and again, I've used 3 VCOs, and I'm also opening and closing the filter and the resonance using 2 other LFOs, just to give some motion to the sound. Then this is what you end up with. And notice that the clock that I'm using here is a 16th clock, so it's going to change every 16 beats. So that produces a very rich, deep, sort of throbby bass drone to go underneath the plinky part, the sequence part. So now I'm going to play both together so you can see how they fit. So now we're getting sort of like the basic parts of a patch. It's generating music that's evolving, and it's got harmonies, which are fitting together, but again are constantly changing over time, giving that sort of like piece of music you can just set playing and it plays forever, something different, but has familiar elements to it that repeat and loop and keep some of the same tonality of the piece. And again, this is something that I strive for in my pieces. You can do completely random stuff, and that's lots of fun. But I like something that's got a sort of a structure to it, where it is random, but it's semi-random, and it's probabilities of things changing over time, but also certain things staying the same, so that that sort of sameness sort of breeds a familiarity in the brain. It's sort of like, oh yeah, there's that little loop, and it plays that loop for a while, then it changes. It's not constantly changing all the time, so you never get comfortable listening to it. And again, that's not for everybody, but that's the way that I like to work. Okay, let's go on to the next addition to the patch. Now, I've stepped away from the big patch to do a little simple patch, because what I discovered was in the big patch it's harder to hear what I'm doing. So I've isolated what I'm doing in this little simple patch to show you another technique that I'm going to be using in the big patch. What I've got here is a simple 3-step sequence being played by the PS16 going into the cornrows X. Sounds like this. So just a repetitive 3-note sequence. But what I've done is I'm going to use another PS16 as a sequenceable transposer. So what does that mean? Well, basically this is all playing in the key of C. So it's playing C, F, G, C, F, G, C, F, G. But I want to transpose the sequence up to a different key at certain points. So I'm going to use the second PS16 to do that. And the PS16 is set so that on the first note it will play in the key of C, the second note it will play in the key of F, the third note it will play in the key of G, and the fourth note it will play in the key of B flat. B flat below the C that started, and then it will loop round. So it's going to play 4 transpositions in sequence, C to F to G to B flat. And what I did was I took the CV output from the phrase sequencer and put it into a merge. In this case I'm using the excellent 2:5 merge unit from AS. So the CV output from the first PS seq goes into input A. The transposing part from PS16, the second one, goes into port B, and then the output is fed into the volt per octave input of this cornrows X. So now when I play the sequence and I start running it, what you'll actually hear is this original sequence playing, and I've set the second sequence to change every 8 clocks. So this is playing at 2 times clock speed, and this is changing every 8 clocks. So you'll hear the piece transpose over time, like this. So now what you can do is literally sequence transpositions into your piece. And this is a really simple technique that I use a lot, but I've got to be honest, I haven't actually seen anybody else do it, and I was a bit surprised. And again, if someone has, I apologize, I must have missed it. But to sequence transpositions in a very simple way, this is the easiest way I know. And because you can sequence them exactly, you can get precise transpositions at specific points in your song if you want it. Or if you're like me in this patch that I'm creating, I want to create sort of semi-random transpositions that happen at different random points in the song. So to do that, what I'm going to do is change the length of the sequence to 16 steps. So now most of the steps are going to be C steps. All right, so the first one is a C here. So there's the first step's a C, second step's still an F, third step's a G, fourth step's a B flat, and then the rest are all C's. Now I'm going to add a couple of extra F's in there. So I'll add an F there, and I'll add an F an octave below as well. And then I'm going to add a G and a G an octave below. So now we've got quite a few C's, one F, normal thing, and then a couple more F's, one an octave up and one an octave down, a G an octave up and a G an octave down, and that one solitary B flat there. Then if I change the sequence mode to random, now it'll pick one of those 16 notes at random. And again, because most of them are C's, then often it will just keep the same scale, C scale. But every so often it will change to a different one at random. So it will sound something like this. So now what I've got is I've got a sequence that's, being transposed randomly but with probability involved, so that it's more likely to stay in one particular key, but every so often it will change more or less depending on how many of the other notes I've put into the sequence. And if you want more probability, more randomness, you could make up a song for this to happen from, and then random the song as well. So you could have a lot of C's and only the very occasional other notes, just to make it less likely to change. Or you can slow the clock down so it only changes every 64 beats or so on. And this becomes a very interesting technique, which I use in probably 50% of my patches for doing transpositions. Again, sometimes I want them random, but also sometimes I want them to happen at specific points in the song, and so I'll use a sequencer to time that and do that transposition very easily. And of course, the idea is, in fact, although I'm just transposing one voice here, if you have a merge channel for each of your voices, they'll all transpose at the same time. You would just take another CV output to here and another output from here to here, and then send this output to another module, and so on. So you could build up a whole sequence of things, which is what I've done in the major patch, the one I'm working on, which I'll show you now. And so we're back to the main patch, and here is the PS16 and the merge that I'm using to transpose both the lead part and the bass part. And I've set this up again, just like I did in the previous example, with the majority of notes being C, but with a G and an F and a B flat, and then the rest are C's, and then the C an octave down. So there are basically 4 C octave downs, 1 each of F, G, and B flat, and the rest are C's. So every so often, at random, the entire set of sequences will be transposed either up or down, depending on the value received by the sequencer here. And this is what it sounds like. So there you go. That's how I'm transposing the entire set of sequences using, again, another PS16 and merging the volt per octave outputs from both the transposing sequencer and the pitch generating sequencers through a couple of merges and then back to their original devices. And again, this is just a technique you can use in all sorts of situations where you want to transpose entire pieces up and down, or even just by octaves sometimes can work quite well. Okay, let's move on to the next bit. So, after a lunch break and a bit of relaxation, come back to the patch, and I've added quite a few extra bits now. So let's take a look at them and what I've done and why. So the first thing you'll notice is the addition of a couple of gate sequencers. And that's because I've added a percussion track. And I'm using the QuadPercs here as my percussion module. This is from Ohmer. And I actually like this percussion module because it gives you 4 sample drums to choose from a huge range of samples. And there are lots of samples in here. To give you an example, if I go to this first one, and here we're looking at the Roland RX8, which is the kick I'm using for this one, but there are lots of them, all sorts of different kits sampled, everything from the 707, 808, 909, Oberheims, drumulators, Korg gear, Lindrums, Roland gear, Yamaha, the RX5, just a lot of very useful kits that I use all the time in my work. And so these are quite handy for picking out specific drum sounds that I want for this specific case. So I'm going to use the RX8 and the kick drum number 1. And again, there are several kicks in here, several snares for this kit. And then we've got, you know, open hi-hats, crash cymbals, ride cymbals, rim shots, toms. I mean, you know, this thing has got a whole bunch of stuff in it. Cowbells. And this is just one of the kits. This just happens to be the Roland RX9. Or sorry, Roland R8 kit. And congas, hand claps, wooden kicks, and, you know, just a whole wide range of sounds. So I'm going to use as I said, the R8's kick for this. And what I've done is I've programmed a simple pattern here using the first 2 rows of the first gate seek64, and using its probability functions, it will play these gates all the time, and this last one it will do every so often, just to give a slight different feel to the track. So let's listen to the bass drum part. So there's the bass drum part. Now hi-hat part I'm using here, and I put notes on every single beat, but if you notice a lot of them are yellow. That means they'll play at random, so there will definitely be a hi-hat on this beat and these 2 beats and this one, but these will come in at random, and I've added a bit of delay to them to give some rhythmic motion, and that will sound like this. Now you'll also hear there's an open hi-hat as well, and that's being played here. And again, these notes are only at random, so it might play on there, it might not. It will never play on these notes. So it just gives a feel of a drummer playing the hi-hat open and closed without the pattern being repetitive. And then finally I've got the snare part, where it will definitely play on the off beats here, here, and here. And then these remaining beats, it may or may not play, again, based on some probabilities I've set up. And that will sound like this. And then I've set up these switches here, as you can see, to turn them on and off. And this switch here turns them all off. So that's just muting the outputs here to turn things on and off. There's the 4 mutes going to the 4. Well, 3 buttons, and this one, the hi-hat's muting both the high open and the closed hi-hats. So then what I've done is I've created a bass part, a sort of a plucked bass part, and the bass part is mimicking the same notes as the drone part. So the pitches will be exactly the same as the drone part, but what they're going to do is give it some rhythmic feel. And to link the rhythmic feel to the drum parts, what I've done is taken the gate from the bass drum and the gate from the snare part. So if you look here, you can see this chord goes down to here, and from the snare part here, that goes to here. And I've combined those again by merging, and taken the output and put that into the gate of the slap for this voice. So now the bass will play at the same time as the bass drum and the snare drum. So it sort of tightens up the bass and drums together. And sometimes this is quite an interesting way of doing it. So you end up with effects like this. With the drum part, and I'm opening and closing the envelope to make the notes shorter and longer here using another LFO. And I'm also using another LFO to change the pulse width modulation for the square wave here. So I'm using a square wave for this voice, and then I'm using the bassness. And I find if you add a sine wave to a bass part, it gives it a bit more depth and thump to it when you need it. If I turn that sine off, you'll see. That's without the sine. And that's with the sine wave. So it just richens it up a bit. Now if I add the drone bass to it, I'm going to take that bass part and link it to the drums on and off here. So when I turn the drums off, that rhythmic bass part will stop as well. So it just gives me a really easy way of turning on and off the drums and bass together. Now if I then open up the main lead part, this is what the whole thing sounds like together. So we're progressing. We're getting a rhythmic part now running. We've got a bass line with it. We've got transposition. We've got random leads. And we've got some semi-random and transposed bass lines to go with it. So what's next? So now it's almost an hour later after the last clip that I showed. And I've spent this last hour fine-tuning, tweaking, and adjusting all the various parameters in the patch. There's also a couple of additions that I've made. I've added a new sequence pattern down the bottom here. This is just a simple repeating sequence being played by the Cornrows X. But what I've done here is I'm modulating the Cornrow X's wavetable from the WMAP preset. And I'm modulating that because it gives this feel of a sort of random stepping filter effect. Kind of like the beginning of Won't Get Fooled Again, sort of. But it just adds a little bit of movement and flavor to the piece. And it's going to be brought in automatically by a trigger from the Turing machine going over to here. And that will trigger the mute on and off for that fast sequence part. Then the other thing that I added was I added a Vessek, one of Vult's wonderful modules, and this is one of my favorite oscillators. And I've used that to thicken out the lead sound, but also give a bit of glide, get a bit of portamento in there every so often. So it makes the lead line a little bit more synthetic, a little bit more synthy-like, just a better overall tone mixed in with the original part. I've tweaked the drum parts, added a few extra random bass drum parts and snare parts, hi-hats, etc. And again, I've used probability here, so they won't play all the time, but you'll hear most of them every so often. And also, again, as I said in the last bit, I've linked the bass part to the bass drum and the snare part to give a decent rhythm. Excuse me, had a bit of a cough there. So now the bass part and the bass drum and the snare are linked together. The addition of the Vessek and addition of the separate new sequence pattern, and the patch is complete. I also tweaked LFO speeds, I tweaked a few of the filter settings, and I've automated the on-off of the Turing machine's lock, and tweaked that a little bit just to make it a bit more interesting, so we get some repetitive patterns every so often, but then other times it will generate brand new sequences and then repeat those. So this is the final patch, and I've left it up with the cables on so you guys can see how they're all cabled together. I'll just turn it a bit deeper for you guys for a brief moment. There you go, so you can pause the video and take a look at that. It looks quite a bit of a nest of cables. Probably the most of them are actually the reset cables for everything, and I use reset to everything so that when I press reset here, everything starts from a known position. You know, the beginning of the sequences, LFOs from their midpoint position, so I know what to expect when I press play. I know where everything's going to start from, and this is a very useful technique to make sure that you do use reset for all the modules that have a reset capability, so that when you start the patch and you press reset, everything starts together in the way you would expect it to. But again, that takes up a lot of cables, so you can see that's part of the rat's nest I've got going on here. Okay, so let me just fade this back down again a bit. So that's the end of episode 1 of season 2 of Talking Rackheads. Hope you enjoyed it. If you've got any questions or any comments, please make them in the comments below or on the Facebook page, and I'll try and answer any and all of them as and when I can. I will be posting up this patch, the final patch, plus some of the intermediate ones in a couple of days. I have to say that at the moment I have no internet after Hurricane Michael passed by. It's knocked us offline again, but I believe it'll only be for a day or so. So hopefully you guys will see this on Saturday, if not before. The next episode of Talking Rackheads will be in a couple of weeks or so. I'm not going to put out new episodes exactly every 2 weeks as I was doing. I found that was too limiting. It seems it's a better idea just to put them out when they're done. There may be like a week between episodes, or sometimes 3 weeks, an average of about 2 weeks per episode. But that way it gives me the flexibility to get things done in a reasonable amount of time. And also if any new modules come out or whatever, then it gives me the opportunity to include them in Talking Rackheads and not have to hold up the reviews of them simply because the episode is not due for another week or so. So I hope that makes sense. Okay, so I'll see you in a couple of weeks or so. Everybody be safe, have a great couple of weeks, and I'll see you then.